If you've ever wanted to have a wander around Ubisoft's painstakingly recreated version of ancient Egypt without getting in trouble with guards or getting eaten by a rogue crocodile, today could be your lucky day. Even more so if you fancy learning a little something without having to worry about sitting an exam afterwards. Discovery Tour is a new mode being added to Assassin's Creed Origins, one that will allow you to explore Bayek's Egypt without being interrupted by combat or quests. It's basically a virtual museum with guided tours and historical sites to discover. If that sounds up your street, here are 9 interesting facts we learned about Discovery Tour after chatting to the team that made it.
Built around 2550 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Giza is considered one of the most iconic structures of Egypt.
The Great Walls of Alexandria had a humble beginning.
Released on the 20th of February for free as a title update and also being sold on PC as a standalone, Assassin's Creed Origins Discovery Tour is made up of 75 different individual tours, and these tours are divided into 5 categories: Egypt, Pyramids, Daily Life, Alexandria, and Romans. You can experience these as 25 different avatars, including 5 versions of Bayek. None of these have to be unlocked, but will be available to select from the beginning. You don't have to rigidly stick to the tour parameters either, and straying from the highlighted path won't result in a game over or a desynchronization. Instead, you can free roam the entire game world at your leisure. And best of all, most game systems are there. You can call your horse, you can use the eagle, you just can't fight or die. So bump into all the soldiers you want, climb where you will, no one will get angry, and there are no consequences. Aside from the tours, it's a great way to explore, wander around, drink in, and appreciate how rich and how beautiful the world is without being bothered or rushed. It is literal virtual tourism. You can start a tour from the map screen or from the passport page, which has the full 75 tours listed, or you can go to a tour directly by wandering the 3D world. The UI tells you which tours you've started, which you've partially uncovered, and which tours you have completed. Each listing also, helpfully, tells you how long the tour is likely to last and how many stations, or stops, it has along the way. Once you begin a tour, it links the various stations together along a glowing path, and each station moves the camera so you can look at what is being discussed. You can also press a button to see a selection of appropriate historical sources at each station.
The Apis bull lived with its harem in a sacred barn located in an enclosure in the Temple of Ptah.
The Assassin's Creed series has always had a wealth of historical experts involved in every AC iteration, to assist in their broad strokes to some weirdly niche subjects. There was a Mohawk expert hired for AC3, for example. The development team basically gather as much info as they possibly can and then begin to create a world. That open world is the basis for Discovery Tour, an Assassin's Creed without combat or time pressure. The real idea for Discovery Tour, however, all started with the development team talking to the education industry and listening to what they would like. Ubisoft had long been aware that schools were interested in using Assassin's Creed's open worlds as a learning tool, but the more aggressive systems in the game made this kind of difficult.
The Roman people hated Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
The team then asked scientists and Egyptologists to write 20 tours for them, which they could then cut back and use in the Discovery Tour. Ubisoft then narrowed down these volumes into tours, focusing on accessibility, and tried to integrate these tours into the 3D world. According to franchise historian Maxime Durand, that didn't go well. These 20 tours were way too long, we were covering way too many things with each tour, and a tour might last maybe 2 hours. The first attempt at Discovery Tour was not very good and not very convincing from an experience point of view. The content was all there, but the experience was not good. We had to break the tours down into shorter, more focused tours, and then we had to find places in the world where these tours made sense. So the team returned to the basic design, sat down again and tried to cut tours into smaller segments. In the end, the team went from 20 tours to 75, which worked much better in the 3D world. Instead of players players going through one long tour about daily life in Egypt, this was cut down into multiple parts which could be dotted around to cover different aspects of daily life before players moved on to do something else. This is essentially how the final version of Discovery Tour exists now.
Tons per block.
Discovery Tour doesn't just give an insight into history, it's about game development too. At each station, each point of interest on the tour line, the game talks about the history, but sometimes it gives players a peek behind the curtain and explains moments when the team had to step away from history and explains why they had to do that. For example, at the Alexandria Library, the tour mentions that there was no clear historical description of the actual Library of Alexandria, but it was known that it was very famous. Therefore, a lot of other cities were inspired by this world-class library, and so the team turned to the Library of Gelsus in Turkey, which has survived. They used that as a reference point to create the Library of Alexandria in the game. If that seems a little bit like the game is cheating, it really isn't. A lot of what we supposedly know about history is deduced using established facts and framework to read between the lines of what we don't know to make informed guesses about a lot of things that, whether due to poor record keeping, natural disaster, or deliberate human intervention, have been lost to time. Another example of filling the gaps. The pyramids were already 25 centuries old by Cleopatra's time. They were likely already a little bit decayed. Ubisoft therefore had to imagine this middle state, where the pyramids were not as knackered as they are now, but they're still not perfect either. The same goes for the Sphinx.
Today,
Discovery Tour was made by a team of about 23 people, all of whom had worked on Assassin's Creed Origins. Normally, after a long development process, a team can get rather tired of a project. But according to Ubisoft, the Discovery Tour re-motivated everyone so much that every one of its 23-person team volunteered themselves to work on it. The team actually took the Discovery Tour to schools to test how effective it was as a learning tool. They would show up with consoles and early builds of the experience and get kids to play. The methodology was as follows. Ubisoft would choose kids who got bad scores on a pre-test it gave them, which was supposedly very challenging. This was because they wanted to see whether kids would actually learn from the tours rather than relying on knowledge they already had. Ubisoft then divided these kids into two groups. One would go off and have an actual proper school lesson that covered the stuff in the tour. The other group would just play the game with no teacher guidance apart from the opportunity to highlight things that were important. For reference, the Library of Alexandria tour was the one that was used. After the two groups either learned or played the game, they then sat a post-test. The teachers' group's pass rate went from 22 to 52%, and the Discovery Tour group pass rate went from 22 to 41%. While that may not seem all that impressive, the thing to remember is that the Discovery Tour group were not being taught. They were just playing the game and absorbed the necessary information almost without thinking about it. The ideal endgame for this kind of potential for learning is to combine both approaches here, to have a teacher do the teaching while the kids play the Discovery Tour simultaneously. For Discovery Tour to be a useful tool in the classroom. Jean Gaston, creative director on Assassin's Creed Origins and Discovery Tour, was keen to point out that the intention was not to replace teachers, but to be something fun and supplemental to help kids learn. In our interview with Jean Gaston, he also talked about how all the sources and references Ubisoft used in Origins are partial. You have an engraving here, a papyrus over there, and somehow you have to join the dots. And that's difficult when making a 3D world. It's using all these elements and using consultants who have specialties, Jean explained. We try to gather all this into something that makes sense, and which is credible. All these pieces are glued together. Now, this concept is funny when you think about it, because the Assassin's Creed series only really exists and can exist because it is constructed in a way so that it can credibly slot into all these gaps in history. So, by doing the Discovery Tour, Ubisoft is kind of pulling it all back and showing what the game knows and what the game doesn't know. It really is as much creation as recreation, Jean admits. But such is a lot of history, and the game tries to be as faithful as it can wherever possible. The structure of a big city like Alexandria, it is quite well known, even down to where the administrative buildings were located or the fact that the rich people tended towards the north where they could get the good air from the sea, Jean says. We pick the most iconic landmarks, we position them, and then we try to project the life of the city around them. The team's main mission in making Discovery Tour, however, was not to be the final stop for education, but to inspire curiosity. The way we see it, our mission is making people aware of what's existing, the team tells us, especially now with 360-degree cameras and things like that. When it comes to digitalization and preservation of the real world, that is more accurate, definitely. But what we are doing, we're able to make a lot of people aware of what exists and interest them in that. The more people know about these places and start to care about them, the more we can trigger an interest, and that is a path to preservation. This is a way of saying, this is important, we need to care about it, it must not disappear. It's all about making people curious. What people and players have learned about ancient Egypt by the time they come to play Discovery Tour is very diverse. Some people might not know anything at all, others might think of the gods of Egypt, Exodus, Antony and Cleopatra. So, says franchise historian Maxime Durand, when they can get into contact with a digital world like ours, that becomes their new paradigm of ancient Egypt. It kind of rewrites how people picture it, in other words. A little bit like when you watch a film about a book you've already read and it changes how you actually visualize the characters. But, continues Maxime, it's not perfect. And this is why it was so important for us to finally be able to do the Discovery Tour, to explain that it's not perfect. But it's such a strong tool to envision a whole universe. To me, as a historian, what's interesting is that when we use all these different bits of history, written by a lot of different people with different perspectives, it puts them into context, and it can sometimes challenge the vision that people had. Before, we studied history mostly through kings and queens, and with time, we can get more interested in the daily life of people. You can see how some things evolve and how, put together, some theories don't work at all. Interesting.
Whoa.
What do you think of Discovery Tour as a concept? As someone kind of fascinated with ancient history, it seems like a brilliant way to bring all the work the development team do to make things as accurate as possible into the spotlight. And it really could be a cool way to help kids or anyone else learn a little something while having a bit of fun. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and do be sure to check out some of our other videos or even subscribe if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye!